Yeah, sure. Thank you very much for that.
Very long.
And looking at it, the very fact that the liberation war itself, it was organized in such a way that command had to be exercised on the people, both during the politicization process of getting the masses to participate in the struggle and in the process of controlling, regulating, and imparting knowledge as well as discipline to the comrades that were fighting the war. There was a certain degree of authoritarianism that was required for that, a certain degree of command. And so looking at it, it implies the very fact that the ideology of liberation was strongly rooted on authoritarianism. And the transition then to independence was going to obviously get us to a point at which, if we have those very same comrades that were exercising command and authority during the struggle, we are going to have that problem. But you have a chapter that you titled "Winner Takes All." That partly covers the time at which Zimbabwe had the government of national unity. That is the time that we had hope that we began to be optimistic that there might be changes that might destroy all forms of these authoritarian and draconian laws, and then usher Zimbabwe into a new trajectory, a new dispensation that would possibly be much more democratic and deliver on the economic front. But that did not happen. And we are still trapped in the very same problems that we have had in the past are still the very same problems that we have. What could possibly be the problem, and what could possibly be the way forward?
So can I just say one thing about your first point about authoritarianism within the military and kind of that struggle mentality? I think you're completely right about the importance of command and all that. However, I'm very much a student of Brian Raftopoulos, the Zimbabwean political scientist, labor historian, political scientist, everything. And I think Brian is really right in his emphasis, and he certainly taught me to take seriously this idea that within those movements there were always competing ideas. So he would emphasize that yes, there was kind of an authoritarian trend, but there was also a trend that took human rights and democracy and the voices of the people really seriously. So I think we need to see those as kind of competing pressures within those ideas and norms, and the people were contesting them. And we know from people like David Moore and others who studied those periods in the trenches that people were arguing and debating about those things within ZANU, within ZAPU. There was actually contestation over, how do we lead, who leads? What I think maybe people didn't think through enough was how to lead afterwards. And so we have Zimbabwe's a hugely well-educated country, and we see a very technocratic top-down leadership. So decisions were made for people rather than by people afterwards. And I think that's where things start to fall apart. But you asked about the winner takes all. So I think that's where we need to look at the state institutions. And that's where we see real similarities between Zimbabwe's politics and politics in many other post-colonial countries. One of my other concerns or critiques early on when I started studying Zimbabwe, and the first thing I say in my book is a critique of treating Zimbabwe as exceptional, as somehow different to other countries. And I think that's wrong, because I think that what we see in this zero-sum politics, this winner-takes-all politics, is something that is very typical of post-colonial states. And that is, as you say, a politics whereby whoever's in charge of the state grabs everything. And in Zimbabwe, this is a legacy of the Rhodesian state. For all that it had, at some points, trappings of liberal politics, it also had a very powerful, very controlling state, enhanced by the sanctions period. But this is all, we see this also in many other countries where the colonial state squeezed out a middle class. In the settler states, that tended to be reserved for either the white settlers or Asian and other groups who migrated in and became those groups. And so you had a state whereby there was not a power base that could easily, a financial power base that could easily stand up against the state, because the state's model, the politics and economics are so tightly linked that the political, to be a strong politician, you have to have economic resources, and to be economically strong, you have to have political ties. And we see this when we think about the relative scarcity of nationalist politicians who emerge as business people or with their own financial resources. Most of the people who emerge as nationalist politicians are teachers and pastors and so forth, who are tied into the state. So when the politicians become, when politicians get into power, it's through the state that you can enrich yourself and develop some sort of autonomous, your own resources to further your political career, to further your ambitions. But there's the business sector is tightly interlinked into the state. And this is what the historian Fred Cooper calls the gatekeeper state. And I've tried to develop these ideas in writing that I and other people have done, to think